Hello, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's joined so far. It's just a couple of minutes before we're going to get ready to start, so we'll begin in just a couple of moments as other folks log in. So thank you for being here. As you may imagine, we are all working from our homes in various parts of the world. And I think all of us have cats, dogs, some children maybe. So I hope you will understand that if you hear a bark or you see a cat walk on the sofa behind me or somebody meowing, just understand we're all animal people, and this is what it's like working from home. They sometimes join us in our meetings. We have a couple of comments saying, we'd love to see your dogs or cats, so don't worry, they might make a special guest appearance. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. It's right on the button here. I am Angela Grimes, CEO of Born Free USA, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. Throughout the session, please use the chat or the Q&A functions for questions or comments. We will answer as many of them as we can get to following the presentations. I know we have many of our wonderful supporters with us today. And for those of you who may be just getting to know us or new to Born Free, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. Born Free's vision is a coexistent future where humans no longer exploit wild animals. We work to ensure that all wild animals, whether living in captivity or in the wild, are treated with compassion and respect and are able to live their lives according to their needs. Born Free is a global organization that includes offices in the United States, the United Kingdom, as well as in Kenya, South Africa, and Ethiopia. Collectively, the Born Free family has programs on 5 continents supporting wildlife communities in North America, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Europe, and Asia and Oceania. We're fighting to end a number of threats that affect the survival of entire species, but are also concerned with the lives of individuals. Our work includes the trade in wild animals and their parts, trapping and fur, protecting animals through policy from the local level all the way up to the international intergovernmental levels. We also rescue and care for animals in our sanctuaries around the world, including at our primate sanctuary in Texas, from where Liz Tyson is joining us today, which is home to more than 450 monkeys, many of whom were rescued from situations like research labs, private homes, and zoos. And then, of course, today's topic, campaigning to end trophy hunting and canned hunting. We have a panel of experts here. They're going to each address various aspects of this industry. Dr. Mark Jones, Head of Policy in Born Free's UK office. Eduardo Gonçalves, founder of the Campaign to Ban Trophy Hunting. Jen Place, Director of Government Relations with Pike and Associates. And our first speaker, Dr. Liz Tyson, Programs Director from Born Free's US office. Liz has helped animals across the globe. She helped establish the very first locally run sterilization program for street dogs in the Middle East, worked with indigenous communities in the Colombian Amazon to end the hunting of wild primates, She ran a UK charity campaigning to end the exploitation of animals in circuses and zoos, and helped design a new rehabilitation complex for rescued monkeys at Born Free Sanctuary in Ethiopia and Sesikote. In 2018, she earned her doctorate in animal welfare law. Liz, I'm going to pass the microphone to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so delighted to see so many people joining us today. Really grateful that you're here to be part of this important discussion with us. My role today really is just to set the scene and to provide some background context for some of the really important information that's going to be delivered by our expert panel a little bit later in the webinar. So what is trophy hunting? Trophy hunting is the barbaric hunting and killing of an animal with the purpose of using that animal's dismembered body parts as a macabre kind of trophy. Lions, elephants, primates, antelope, rhinos, bears, and other animals fall victim in their thousands to this cruel activity annually. Now, the timing of our webinar is pertinent because July 2nd, just a few weeks ago, marked the 5th anniversary of the tragic death of Cecil the lion. He was killed by a US trophy hunter, and his death catapulted the issue of trophy hunting onto the international stage. Now, I think there was a strong feeling at the time that Cecil's death, tragic as it was, might be a tipping point or a catalyst for real change to bring an end to trophy hunting altogether. However, here we are 5 years on, thousands more lions and other animals have been killed in the meantime. And while there has certainly been some progress towards change, which our other panelists will talk to you about, there hasn't been enough. And why might this be? Public opinion polls overwhelmingly oppose trophy hunting. The public do not want this practice to continue. The practice is unarguably horrible for animal welfare. The individual animals targeted die painful deaths, sometimes following prolonged suffering. They die scared. They die trying to evade the guns or the arrows or the bolts trained on them. And the families and pride or herd or troop mates of these animals killed, left behind, suffer their loss. One of the major reasons that we believe there hasn't been more movement to end this issue is that the powerful hunting fraternity have spun an impressive, positive, and let's face it, largely false narrative around the practice, which bizarrely claims that trophy hunting is in fact good for animals and the environment. In an almost Orwellian style argument, they say that killing individual animals whose species numbers are in dangerous decline somehow contributes to boosting numbers of that same species. They argue that local communities benefit, but the local communities tell us different. They argue that local economies benefit, but the paper trail shows income largely lining the pockets of the trophy hunting companies. They argue, if all else fails, that there is this complex science that us bleeding heart animal rights liberals simply can't understand. But it really is very simple. These arguments are not true, and our panelists are going to go into detail and explain why that's the case as part of their presentations. But why does it matter? Why does it matter to Born Free? And why does it matter here in the US? Surely this practice happens in far-flung places on the African continent. Well, as Jem Place will tell us, the US is the largest importer of hunting trophies in the world, with 1.26 million items imported between the years 2005 and 2014. Close to home too, Canada is one of the largest exporters of hunting trophies, largely due to bear hunts. Even here in the US, there's a burgeoning trade in trophy hunting with vast areas of land. In states like Texas, the state that I'm talking to you from right now, have been given over to pay for killed trophy hunting ranches where exotic species are bred to die for profit. It's a simple case of supply and demand. We create the demand, and if we want the cruelty to stop, we must take action here in order to protect animals both at home and abroad. And above all, we must take action so that in another 5 years' time, we're not sitting here again marking the 10-year anniversary of Cecil's death and the extinction or near extinction of species whose demise was accelerated by this horrific game of death. So I hope in this discussion today, we can arm you with both the information and the tools you need to be part of that change wherever you are in the world, and together we can end this cruel practice once and for all. And with that in mind, I'd like to hand you over to Mark Jones. Dr. Mark Jones trained as a veterinarian at Liverpool University, worked for many years in fish health and disease control before traveling extensively and working on rescue and rehabilitation projects for primates, bears, birds, and reptiles in South America. and Asia. He has not one but two master's degrees in aquatic and wild animal health and several years experience in the non-government animal protection sector, covering international wildlife trade, wildlife management and animal welfare issues. He joined Born Free in 2014, where he is currently head of policy. And today he's going to be talking to us about the canned hunting industry. I'd like to hand over to Mark. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Liz. That's a really nice introduction. I'm not sure I fully deserve it. It's a real honour to be speaking to you all from the southeast of England here. And I wanted to spend my time today talking about South Africa's predator breeding industry and canned hunting industry, and Born Free's campaign to bring an end to the commercial breeding of lions and other predators for canned hunting and the lion bone trade. Next slide, please. First, some definitions and a bit of a potted history. Canned hunting is the hunting of animals that are usually, but not always, captive bred and are released into enclosed areas where they're targeted by paying hunters. The industry as it exists today in South Africa probably had its origins in the late 1980s or early 1990s, when hunters paid to shoot retired circus or zoo lions that were released onto farmland in the Eastern Cape. And it really came to international attention in 1997 when the Cook Report, a British TV investigative documentary series, exposed the industry to a wide audience. At the time, the report concluded that more than 300 lions appear to be caught up in this sordid industry. Fast forward then to 2015, when the exponential growth of the industry, supported by the South African government at both federal and provincial levels, was exposed in the documentary Blood Lions, which was made by Ian Mitchell and his team in South Africa. And today, as many as 12,000 lions and other predators, including tigers, leopards, cheetahs, servals, and various hybrid crosses, are being bred and held in captivity in some 300 odd facilities across South Africa to feed the tourism and canned hunting industries and to supply skeletons and other products for international trade. South Africa isn't the only country to breed wild animals in captivity for canned hunting, but it does have by far the largest commercial captive breeding industry for lions and other predators. Next slide, please. The predator breeding industry is a really cynical business, and the animals are exploited for profit at every stage of their development. Cubs are typically removed within a few days of birth in order to bring their mothers back into breeding condition quickly and to provide tourists with cute photo props and volunteers with cubs to hand rear in the mistaken belief that they're destined to be returned to the wild. As the animals grow, they're used for other tourist activities such as walking with lions. And the ultimate fate for many of these is to be shot in a canned hunt by a paying hunter, usually, but not always from overseas, or to be killed so their body parts can be sold into international markets, or to go back into the never-ending breeding cycle. Next slide, please. According to official reports, between 2009 and 2018, South Africa exported almost 7,000 trophies from captive bred lions. These exports peaked in 2015, up to when around 2/3 of the exports were destined for the United States. But a ban on imports of trophies from captive bred lions to the US under the Endangered Species Act, effectively imposed in 2016, has had a significant impact on South African exports, although that ban has been weakened under the current US administration, with import applications now being considered on a case-by-case basis. In the meantime, the industry has been busy seeking new markets for its grisly products. Exports of captive bred lion trophies from South Africa to EU countries roughly doubled from 75 in 2014 to 160 in 2018. And other export markets have been opening up in the likes of Mexico and Russia. Next slide, please. In spite of what the breeders and proponents of the industry might claim, the canned hunting industry has no conservation value whatsoever. Whatever unwitting volunteers and tourists might be told, there is no big cat breeding in South Africa for conservation purposes, and lions are not being bred for release into the wild. In any event, captive bred lions are tame, human-imprinted animals and would be behaviourally and genetically unsuitable for wild release. Even the South African government's own biodiversity management plan for the African lion acknowledges that captive lions are used exclusively to generate money. Because canned hunting and wild lion hunting attract different types of people at vastly different prices, the canned hunting industry does nothing to reduce the pressure trophy hunting may pose to wild lions. And there is real concern that lion cubs may be taken from the wild and smuggled into South Africa for use in the captive breeding and canned hunting industries. There have been some really worrying reports of cubs being smuggled across the border from Botswana just recently. In addition, the production and export of lion bones by the captive breeding industry, which are in demand in the Far East as a component of medicinal tonics and are often marketed as an alternative to tiger bone, stimulates demand and legitimizes these products in the eyes of consumers, which then incentivizes poachers and puts wild lions and other big cat populations at increased risk. Next slide, please. The lion breeding and canned hunting industries are also perpetuating unspeakable cruelty. The conditions in which these animals are bred and reared raise serious animal welfare concerns, in addition to those associated with the point at which the animals are targeted and killed. A high-profile example of abuse came to light in 2019, when South Africa's National Council of Societies for the Protection of or the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or NSPCA, brought charges against the owner of Pinnacle Farm in Northwest Province. That's the area of South Africa where the majority of lion farming and canned hunting takes place. In total, 108 lions, caracal, tigers and leopards were found on the farm with serious welfare issues, including inadequate shelter, no provision of water, overcrowding, filthy conditions and disease. The South African Predators Association, or SAPA, which calls itself the responsible custodian of hunting and breeding of predators in South Africa, claims that no welfare issues exist on lion facilities owned by its members. However, at the time of the NSPCA's investigations, the owner of Pinnacle Farm was a prominent SAPA member and was listed as a member of its council. The NSPCA has stated that canned hunting, as well as being unethical, is directly linked to animal abuse, and makes the point that when evaluating welfare impacts, you have to consider not just the point at which the animal is being killed or shot at by a hunter, but also the breeding, transportation, housing and other abuses that these animals suffer. Next slide, please. South Africa's lion breeding and canned hunting industries have been the subject of intense international criticism. At its World Conservation Congress in 2016, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, passed a resolution calling on South Africa to terminate the breeding of lions in captivity for the purpose of canned shooting and restrict captive breeding to facilities that are engaged in conservation projects. In its response, South Africa's Department of Environmental Affairs stated that lion breeding facilities would not be closed down and claimed that they fell within the government's commitment to sustainable use of biodiversity. Next slide. Of course, Born Free absolutely opposes all forms of trophy and recreational hunting, but canned hunting even divides hunting organisations. The Dallas Safari Club, Safari Club International, and a number of other international hunting bodies have issued statements opposing canned hunting on the grounds that it doesn't constitute what they call fair chase. The arguments over canned hunting have also resulted in a split in the Professional Hunting Association of South Africa. Next slide. There are growing voices from outside and within South Africa who are concerned about the damage that the captive predator breeding and canned hunting industries are doing to the country's image as an ecotourism destination. Of course, tourism is vitally important to the South African economy, contributing around 10% of the country's GDP and employing more people than the mining and utilities sectors combined. Many of those tourists visit South Africa, in part at least, to see its magnificent wildlife. So anything that damages brand South Africa, particularly anything negative to do with wildlife, risks some of those tourists going elsewhere, with knock-on impacts for the South African economy. Next slide, please. In 2005, the then Minister of Environment and Tourism in South Africa described lion breeding for cant hunting as a cancer. More recently, Derek Hanekom, former tourism minister and currently South Africa's presidential envoy for the promotion of tourism, made it quite clear that captive breeding lion hunting, or captive bred lion hunting, is damaging South Africa's reputation. So even within the South African government circles, there's huge disagreement over lion breeding and cant hunting. Next slide, please. Born Free has been campaigning for years for an end to the captive breeding and cant hunting industries. In 2018, we released a comprehensive report entitled Cash Before Conservation, based on undercover research into the industry. The report examined the development of the captive predator breeding industry in South Africa and the involvement of prominent people in government in its expansion, the secrecy and lack of accountability surrounding the industry, the unashamed duping of unsuspecting tourists and volunteers who are lulled into thinking that the lion farms are rearing orphaned lion cubs for release into the wild, the increasing international condemnation of the industry, its association with animal abuse and the illegal wildlife trade, and the fast expanding connection with the commercial breeding and slaughter of donkeys, an unspeakably cruel industry which provides meat to predator farms and donkey skins for international trade. And in August 2018, I was invited to present our report to South Africa's Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Environmental Affairs at the government buildings in Cape Town. Now, the Portfolio Committee's deliberations resulted in a parliamentary resolution in November 2018, urging the South African government to end the captive breeding of lions and other predators for commercial purposes. But to date, the South African government has failed to act. Next slide, please. Last year, we released the animated video, The Bitter Bond, which some of you may have seen, which has resulted in close to 300,000 people signing a petition urging the South African government to end canned hunting. We're planning to hand the petition to the South African authorities in the coming weeks in order to generate further public awareness about the industry and to try and increase the pressure on the authorities in South Africa to act. Next slide. So to wind up this brief overview, I think our executive president, Will Travers, put it really well when he said, if we are to secure a future for Africa's lions, the lion breeding and cant hunting industries must be closed down, with responsibility resting squarely with the South African government for ensuring that such a process is conducted with intelligence, humanity, and above all, compassion for the animals concerned. Next slide. So thanks for listening. Rest assured, we'll continue to campaign for an end to canned hunting and all forms of trophy hunting. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the next speaker. Eduardo Gonçalves, founder of the campaign to ban trophy hunting, is author of the best-selling books Trophy Hunters Exposed, Inside the Big Game Industry and Killing Game, The Extinction Industry. He led SOS Lynx's successful campaign in the early 2000s to prevent the first ever extinction of a big cat, the Iberian lynx, in modern times. He was a campaigner and consultant with WWF for many years, was brought in by the Abu Dhabi government to reduce its citizens' ecological footprint, and was instrumental in building a coalition of over 1 million companies in support of the Paris Climate Deal. As CEO of the League Against Cruel Sports, he thwarted moves to bring back fox hunting and instead persuaded the government in the UK to raise jail sentences for dogfighting and animal cruelty to 5 years. In 2018, he founded the campaign to ban trophy hunting, which is today supported by some of Britain and the world's leading public figures, including Ed Sheeran, Liam Gallagher, Judi Dench, and the Catholic Church. The Daily Mail calls him Britain's most prominent anti-hunting activist. The Daily Mirror has bestowed its Animal Hero Award on him, and in an editorial published in May, the Times newspaper officially endorsed the campaign to ban trophy hunting and Eduardo's book, Trophy Hunters Exposed. He lives on a small organic small holding, which is powered by 100% renewable energy, and which he has transformed into a wildlife reserve. So over to you, Eduardo.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That's very kind of you. And hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining this very important webinar organised by Born Free USA. I'm going to talk to you about some of the conservation issues around trophy hunting. Trophy hunters like to say that their sport doesn't harm wildlife and indeed that it's good for conservation. I'm going to tell you why they're wrong. So first of all, modern day trophy hunting as we know it, it was something that was invented by the British and exported to the colonies in Africa and India. And the colonial trophy hunters in the 19th century killed huge numbers of animals. Some of these individuals, they shot hundreds of lions and rhinos, and they killed an estimated 20 million animals in Africa alone during that century. There are at least two extinctions directly attributable to trophy hunting from this area. There was the quagga, which was an animal similar to the zebra. The last one actually was shot by a member of the British royal family. And the other was the bluesbok, which was a type of antelope that roamed in South Africa. And the slaughter continued into and throughout the 20th century. And the records book of Safari Club International, the world's biggest trophy hunting organization, it names the hunters who shot the very last big scimitar-horned oryxes before they too went extinct in the 1980s. So the conservation crisis faced by wildlife today is in large part actually the result of this incredible onslaught that went on for so long. And the large numbers of animals that are still being killed by trophy hunters today, that's exacerbating the multiple threats that wild animals are currently facing. So lions, for example, their populations are in dramatic decline. There are an estimated 500,000 lions, more or less, around the time of World War II. There are just 20,000 today, and trophy hunters have shot 10,000 lions in the last decade alone, half of them in the wild. And there are scientific studies which say that trophy hunting has been the single largest cause of population decline of lions in parts of Africa. African elephants, there were nearly 10 million African elephants at the beginning of the 20th century, the last century. By the end of the century, there are around 500,000. And today, more elephants are being shot by all types of hunters than are born each year. We don't currently know the exact population of leopards, but what we do know, because the IUCN Red List tells us this, is that they're declining. And it's one of the reasons that they've been classed as an Appendix 1 species by CITES, which is the world's wildlife trade regulator. And what that means is that you can't kill or trade leopards or their body parts unless there are exceptional circumstances. However, that ban doesn't actually apply to trophy hunters, at least not in the same way, because hunting trophies, they're classed as personal and household effects. And right now, leopards are actually one of the most popular animals for trophy hunters. Now, it wasn't that long ago in human history that there were more than 1 million rhinos wandering over Africa. There are now just 26,000 white rhinos and less than 5,000 black rhinos. Trophy hunters have just been given permission to shoot double the number of black rhinos every year. And the trophy hunting loophole in CITES that I was just telling you, the one that allows you to kill threatened species if they're for a hunting trophy, not surprisingly, it's being widely exploited by rhino horn traffickers. The world's biggest white rhino so-called trophy hunters today are the Chinese. Let that sink in. Okay, so over the last few days, last week or so, there have been some fresh press reports warning that polar bears could go extinct by the end of the century. It is legal to shoot polar bears in Canada for hunting trophies. Not in the US or Russia, they banned it, but in Canada, you can still do it. And some polar bears have actually been shot supposedly as hunting trophies, but they're killed for their gallbladders. And that's because of the bile in them is used in traditional Chinese medicines, and the galls have entered China through Hong Kong. So the current population of polar bears is somewhere in the region of 20,000. Since the 1960s, hunters have shot 50,000 polar bears for skins and for sport. And I'm afraid it gets worse. The numbers of animals being hunted are, in many cases, going up at the very same time that their populations are going down. So South Africa, which is very much the center of the African safari hunting industry, it's seen a 50% rise in hunting trophies leaving the country over the past decade. Its canned hunting industry that Mark was just talking about, it's expanding into animals such as zebras. You can actually shoot captive bred tigers and jaguars in South Africa at the moment. And despite the furore over the killing of Cecil by American dentist Walter Palmer and the partial restrictions on trophy imports into the US, the numbers of trophies coming into America over the past decade have actually seen relatively little change. Canada, meanwhile, has seen a huge rise, 200% over the last 10 years. And traditional markets like Germany, they've seen a rise in numbers of trophies coming in around around about 20%. It's actually Russia that's seen a rise of around 40% in the last 10 years. And that's because Eastern European markets, they're on the rise. Hungary, at the moment, is the second largest import market for lion trophies. Now, China, meanwhile, it's come from nowhere to occupy second place in the global trophy imports league table. Now, the large numbers are partly fueled by hunting industry prizes. So the industry promotes awards which encourage a hunter to go and shoot large numbers of different animals. So Safari Club International, it's got 80 of these schemes, one of which you have to shoot over 100 different animals around the world to be eligible for. And there's a lot of hunters that have won that prize. And the numbers of animals being shot by individual hunters, even today, are sometimes huge. So Tony Sanchez-Areno, he has got at least 4,000 confirmed kills, and that includes over 1,300 African elephants and 340 lions. Fellow Spaniard Marcel Gomez Sequeira, he's been on 500 safari hunts in his lifetime. He's still alive, still hunting. He's got over 2,000 confirmed kills from 400 different species of animal. Now, the other thing that the industry does that has a major conservation impact is that it encourages hunters to shoot the biggest animals in order to get into its records book. So, for example, if you're hunting an elephant, you have to kill an elephant whose tusks weigh more than 100 pounds in order to get into the Safari Club International record book. Or actually, that used to be the case. They've actually had to change that because of the shrinking tusk sizes. So internal industry records, which I've published in my new book, they confirm scientific studies showing that elephant tusks have been shrinking dramatically over the last 40 years, and that there's also many more tuskless adult elephants today than there used to be. Now, this is a result of what scientists call artificial selection. In other words, when you kill the biggest, fittest, strongest animals, that's the opposite of natural selection. You're leaving behind the smaller, the weaker animals to breed and to pass on their genes. And shrinking tusks and tuskless animals, that's an indicator of that. And what it means for a species like the African elephant is it's going to be more prone to disease. It's also going to be able to, it's going to be less able to survive and adapt to environmental changes such as climate change. So it's going to be harder for them to access water under dry riverbeds during periods of drought, and drought periods are going to get fiercer. They're going to be more frequent, more prolonged thanks to accelerating climate change. So Safari Club International, its response was to lower the entry bar for elephant trophies into the records book to tusks weighing 90 pounds instead of 100 pounds because of the effects of artificial selection. And the effects of artificial selection have also been seen very strongly in lions. There's been a 15% reduction in the genetic diversity of the lion species over the past century. And some genetic strands have just vanished forever, altogether. And hunting industry records, which I also publish in my book, they show that the heads of lions are getting smaller. So to get into the SCI records book for lions, they measure the skull of the lion that you've shot, and then they come up with a score which is based on the length and the width of the skull. And what this tells us, in other words, is that lions are getting smaller as a result of artificial selection. And it's now been estimated that killing just 5% of the remaining adult male lions could be enough to push the species past the point of no return. And the US government has actually said that it believes lions could be extinct in the wild by 2050. Despite this, the current annual trophy hunting quotas for lions are equivalent to 1/3 of the remaining adult male lions living outside of protected areas. So the inevitable question that I get asked, and you've probably got this going around in your heads right now, in the face of all these facts, is how on earth has this been allowed to happen? There was this huge uproar following the killing of Cecil. There are multiple scientific studies showing the disastrous impacts of trophy hunting on wildlife, and specifically on lions. And there's studies that show that when you stop trophy hunting, for example, through local moratoria, as has happened in many countries, wildlife populations bounce right back. So why hasn't anything really fundamentally changed? Well, the answer to that, in large part, is that there's been a huge and very clever lobbying strategy by the industry. So Safari Club International alone, it spent over $140 million on lobbying since the year 2000. And it's made major campaign contributions to the election funds of important politicians like Donald Trump's first Interior Secretary, Ryan Zink, the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, and so on and so forth. And when there were moves to classify the lion as endangered and to put it in CITES Appendix 1, which would made it much harder for American hunters to bring home their lion trophies back into the States, they ran a $1.3 million campaign which managed to stop that from happening. It just so happens, by the way, that one of the biggest donors to Safari Club International is Steve Chancellor, who is a major donor and fundraiser for Donald Trump. Chancellor has won dozens of Safari Club International hunting awards. He's got multiple entries in the SCI records book, and he broke the world record for the largest lion ever shot by a trophy hunter. His wife is also a big trophy hunter. Now, the other thing that the industry has done is to try and rebrand itself as a conservation movement. And it's also set up conservation front organizations in order to promote this narrative that trophy hunting is needed for wildlife conservation. So, for instance, the NRA, the gun rights group, with whom Safari Club is now working quite closely on trophy hunting, it today calls itself a conservation organization, as indeed does Safari Club International. And like it or not, the strategy is working. So Dallas Safari Club, another of the powerful industry groups, it's been admitted as a member of IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Could I have the first slide, please? Right, so one of the key organizations and figures behind this strategy is called Conservation Force. And as you can see from its mission statement, it says some very nice sounding things that I think we can all broadly agree with. Can I have the next slide? This is the founder and chairman of Conservation Force. His name is John J. Jackson III. He's one of the world's top elephant and lion hunters of all time. He's multiple entries in the Safari Club International Records book for lions, elephants, and leopards, I think spotted hyena as well. He's a past president of Safari Club International. This is what he once wrote about elephant hunting. This is what he said: "Nothing else in life is more satisfying than an elephant hunt." And here's something that he said about lion hunting. And this is, I tell you, I swear this is what he actually said. "I can plainly see the African lion that has leaped into the air the moment its head snaps backward and explodes with smoke from my bullet." Jackson is revered by the hunting industry for what he has done. Can I have the next slide? And as you can see here, this is what some leaders of hunting groups have to say about him. So, for example, without Jackson's efforts, elephant hunting by Americans would be a thing of the past. Conservation Force is the most powerful legal force in the US and world on behalf of hunters. It's the most effective organization at promoting sport hunting and advocating for hunters' rights worldwide, and so on, and so on, and so forth. Can we take down the slides for a minute and just go back to the main screen? So there's a reason for this adulation. Jackson and Conservation Force have been almost single-handedly responsible for some of the most significant rulings by national governments and international bodies on what you can and can't hunt or bring home a trophy of. The list of successes, it includes the reopening of elephant trophy imports from much of Africa, the downlisting of endangered animals into lower categories so that there are fewer restrictions on hunting them and trophy imports, defeating efforts to stop white rhino hunting, and so on. And perhaps the most important initiative that he did was something called the Enhancement Initiative. So John Jackson argued that trophy hunting of endangered species improves their conservation prospects. And it was this that led to permits being issued to trophy hunters to shoot critically endangered black rhinos. Despite his record of lion hunting and his remarks about lion heads exploding when he shoots them, John Jackson has sat on a number of IUCN committees, including the Lions Working Group. You could not make this up. And a number of other directors of Conservation Force have also been sitting on key committees of IUCN. Can I have the next slide, please? So, if you want to find out more about the inner workings of the industry and John Jackson and Conservation Force, I go into this into some detail in my book, Trophy Hunters Exposed Inside the Big Game Industry. And can I have the next slide? And if you want to learn about the conservation impacts of trophy hunting on lions, on elephants, polar bears, etc., then I recommend you have a look at my other book, which is called Killing Game, the Extinction Industry. I hope that's helpful. Thank you very much for listening. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Jennifer Place is the Director of Government Relations for Pike Associates, a boutique government relations firm located in Washington, D.C. In this role, she works with and assists Born Free USA with legislative and regulatory matters before Congress and the US administration. And throughout her more than 10 years of educational and professional experience, Jennifer has worked towards the conservation of endangered species, the protection of marine and terrestrial wildlife from inhumane practices both in the US and abroad, and has defended bedrock conservation laws like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. She works closely with congressional offices, federal agencies, corporations, small businesses, US and international fisheries, and NGOs. And she received a dual master's degree in conservation biology and public policy from the University of Oklahoma. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. As Eduardo just explained, there is simply no scientific evidence that trophy hunting benefits conservation or economic development. In fact, there's ample evidence that it actively harms biodiversity. It's the simple truth. Animals are worth more alive than dead. Activities like photo safaris allow for sustainable, lucrative tourism activity in which the same animal can be seen over and over again, as opposed to killed by one hunter one time. The majority of Americans already know this. They want to see international wildlife valued and protected. In fact, as Liz mentioned at the top of the webinar, 86% of Americans oppose hunting big game. And yet, contrary to both fact and the view of the majority, the United States remains the largest importer of wildlife trophies. This is a frustrating disconnect. Sometimes it seems like science and our calls for change aren't resonating at all. A shining example of this resides in Cecil's killer, Walter Palmer. I saw someone in the chat mention him earlier. 5 years now after Cecil's death, and Mr. Palmer is back in the news for spending $100,000 to kill an endangered Argolese sheep last August. This is the same species Donald Trump Jr., a notorious trophy hunter, killed last summer. These rams are the biggest in the world, and there are only 19,000 left in existence. As you'll see on the slide here, looking at the big picture of trophy hunting in the United States, from 2005 to 2014, 1.26 million wildlife trophies were imported into the United States. This includes nearly 6,000 African lions and 5,000 African elephants. Next slide, please. The U.S. is able to remain the largest importer of wildlife trophies in part because of current Fish and Wildlife Service regulations. Even if an animal is listed under the Endangered Species Act, which is our strongest wildlife protection law, there are exceptions that allow for it to be killed for a trophy and imported into the United States, provided the hunter is able to get the right permit at taxpayer expense. In theory, Fish and Wildlife Service regulations and policies are adjusted depending on the best available science and data surrounding a species, but oftentimes you'll see shifts in policy based upon the political whims of the administration. In 2014, the Fish and Wildlife Service banned the importation of elephant trophies from Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe after credible evidence showed that those countries were not sustainably managing their populations. Additionally, the African lion was finally listed under the Endangered Species Act in 2015, just months after Cecil was killed. And although the listing included a special rule allowing for some trophy hunting imports, the Fish and Wildlife Service stopped issuing those permits. However, under the current administration, as many of you know, the Fish and Wildlife Service has reversed course. In October 2017, it issued 33 permits to import 38 lions killed in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Later that fall, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced they would walk back the Obama-era policy and allow elephant trophy imports from Zimbabwe and Zambia. This announcement was stalled and thrown into confusion after President Trump seemingly contradicted the policy with a notable tweet calling trophy hunting a horror show. Next slide. Also in 2017, the Fish and Wildlife Service established a pro-trophy hunting council, the International Wildlife Conservation Council, or IWCC. This council was redundant at best. Its function was already covered under the Wildlife and Hunting Heritage Council. Despite this council was authorized to meet twice a year at taxpayer expense. The 18-person council included notable trophy hunters and trophy hunting enthusiasts, including John J. Jackson III, who Eduardo mentioned earlier, representatives of the firearms and ammunition industries, but not a single scientist or conservationist. This lack of balance was likely a violation of federal law. Fortunately, the IWCC was never able to accomplish much, and its charter was not renewed when it expired last year in December 2019. For all intents and purposes, this council no longer exists. Lastly, and perhaps most alarmingly, in 2018, the Fish and Wildlife Service announced it would evaluate lion, elephant, and bontebok trophies from 6 African countries on a case-by-case rather than a nation-by-nation basis. Previously, the agency created nationwide enhancement findings based upon sound science to evaluate whether a species in a given country could withstand sport hunting by Americans. Transitioning to a case-by-case evaluation of import permits means there is now no public standard by which the Fish and Wildlife Service makes its decision to grant permits. The Fish and Wildlife Service can thus grant import permits with minimal adherence to transparency or science. Next slide, please. Although it is frustrating that the death of Cecil hasn't yet led to an all-out ban on trophy hunting in the US, it did bring the issue front and center and ignited legislative action that continues to make its way through Congress. Following the death of Cecil in 2015, Representative Grijalva of Arizona introduced the Cecil Act. The current iteration of this bill focuses on the US's role in trophy hunting and undoes changes implemented by the Fish and Wildlife Service over the past few years. Among other things, this bill would prohibit trophies of species proposed for ESA protections from being imported absent a permit, reinstate the Obama-era policy of prohibiting imports of all elephant and lion trophies from Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, require the trophy hunting permit applicant to cover all administrative costs of the permit application, removing that burden from the taxpayers, and require the Fish and Wildlife Service to publish each permit application not only for endangered species, but also threatened species. The second bill targeting trophy hunting is the PROTECT Act. This bipartisan bill is championed by Rep. Sheila Jackson Lee, Ted Lieu, and Peter King. This bill not only prohibits importing a trophy of an ESA-listed species, but also bans the killing of a listed species for a trophy within the United States. This would put an end to the killing of imperiled species, which are bred to be shot on canned hunting ranches in the US. As you likely know, particularly for wildlife legislation, bills can take a long time to wind their way through Congress. However, both of these bills have earned substantial support in the House of Representatives, and the Cecil Act was successfully voted out of the House Natural Resources Committee last year. Although it's unlikely either bill will pass this year, we expect both to be reintroduced early next year, where we hope to build on the momentum they've already gained. Meanwhile, the current House version of the funding bill for the Department of Interior includes some good language. It bans the import of lion and elephant trophies from those 3 countries I mentioned earlier, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. We will be fighting to keep this provision in the final version of the bill of the Interior Appropriations. Last slide, please. In conclusion, I'd say it's very easy to get discouraged with the slow pace of progress. As Liz mentioned at the top, while we may hope for a single silver bullet to change everything, the hard truth is progress is always slow and never in a straight line. Especially with trophy hunting, as Eduardo mentioned, we are up against some very powerful and well-funded pro-trophy hunting interests and lobbying groups. But something my boss once told me, we are on the right side of this issue, and as long as we can continue to beat the drum, progress is not only achievable, but some would say inevitable. So our job is simple. We just don't let up. For the rest of this congressional session, Born Free USA and other organizations will continue to look for opportunities to move legislative language forward. Meanwhile, we're already starting to plan for next year and what opportunities and challenges we'll face when the new Congress gavels in. But we can't do it without your help. To that end, Born Free USA has a number of actions you can take to help fight the fight against trophy hunting. We'll be sending out an email listing those actions following this webinar, including urging your congressmen and women to support legislation and calling on the Fish and Wildlife Service to cease issuing permits for trophy imports. And with that, I am happy to hand it back over to Angela.
Well, thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone for these presentations. We've had a lot of comments in the chat session, and several of them are things like, I'm surprised, this is so sick, this is disgusting, how can this be happening? And we all know this, but I think what is most heartening, to me and I think everyone who works on this issue is also what follows that is how can we take action? What can we do to help? How can I do something to be a part of this? So thank you to everyone who is asking this question, and as Jen just said, we will be sending out an email tomorrow with various links, actions that you can take, and more information. And I encourage you all to continue following Born Free USA, Born Free Foundation, and Eduardo in the campaign to ban trophy hunting, so that we can put an end to this. I'm going to go through some questions, and first of all, I'm going to start with an easy one for Eduardo. Somebody would like to know how to follow you on social media.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's very easy. So on Twitter, we're on @CBT Hunting. So C stands for campaign, B for ban, T trophy. So @CBT Hunting. And then on Facebook, it's facebook.com/ban trophy hunting campaign. So facebook.com/ban trophy hunting campaign. We're also on Instagram, but I can't remember off the top of my head what that address is. However, if you go to bantrophyhunting.org, which is the website, then it should have all of the links and connections there.
Great, thank you. I'm going to put this out to the panelists, whoever would like to respond. We have a question: isn't the greatest risk to wildlife populations habitat loss and the human encroachment on their wild spaces and development and loss of habitat? How does that relate to trophy hunting as far as in terms of the threat that poses against habitat loss?
Angela, I can say something on that. There was a big report put out last year by an organisation called IPBES. It's a big science policy forum. And the report, some of you may be familiar with it, was an attempt to provide a global assessment of biodiversity, you know, what's happening to it. And it concluded that biodiversity and nature is in real trouble. And the principal two reasons that it identified, the two causes of the disastrous situation that nature and biodiversity and wildlife finds itself in, with a million species at risk of extinction and so on, were basically habitat loss due to the way that people utilize land and sea, and exploitation, what it called exploitation of organisms, over-exploitation. And trophy hunting is a part of that exploitation. So yes, you're absolutely right, habitat loss is hugely important, and Born Free and many other organizations work really hard with governments and scientists and others to try and protect natural habitats and areas and expand those areas. But we also have to deal with the exploitation industry. And I think there's an attitudinal aspect to this as well. What we have to do is to change the attitudes of people who think it's okay to exploit wildlife for their own personal gratification or pleasure, because that creates the demand within this industry for trophies and for the facilities that allow people to do this. And the trophy hunting industry will often claim that trophy hunting and the existence of trophy hunting areas helps to protect wildlife. But as Eduardo has explained, those areas end up being managed to produce trophies, not managed as areas that are there to protect nature and wider biodiversity. And you end up with all kinds of genetic bottlenecks and problems as a result. So yes, absolutely, habitat protection is hugely important, but tackling issues like trophy hunting is also a very important component.
Thank you, Mark. Eduardo, I think this next question might come to you because you touched on it briefly, but maybe there's more you'd like to say. Trophy hunters like to say that they are creating lots of jobs, and if there's a ban, a lot of people will suffer. That relates to some of the other questions we've had about economic impact. So would you like to address this aspect?
Yes, no, certainly. Trophy hunting is an incredibly inefficient way of creating jobs and prosperity, and also generating revenue for conservation and anti-poaching measures. one of the reasons they actually stopped trophy hunting altogether in Botswana's Okavango Delta was purely for economic reasons, because it just wasn't generating any jobs at all. And so they switched to nature tourism and photographic safaris instead. If you look at Tanzania is quite a good example, because it's always held up as sort of a model country in many ways. But over a quarter of the country's landmass, 26%, is controlled by hunting concessions. So a quarter of the country is a hunting estate. And this generates 0.22% of the country's GDP, something along those figures. That's an incredibly poor use of its natural resource, its land. And if you look at neighboring Kenya, which abandoned trophy hunting in the 1970s, so something like 15% of its GDP actually comes from tourism, and mostly nature tourism. And what it's also able to do is to generate far more jobs. They're better paid. They are all year round. They're not seasonal. They're not menial labor, which is often the case, because in the trophy hunting industry, the wealth stays with the white-owned companies, the outfitters, the safari hunting companies, and also the white-owned farms. Whereas in Kenya, you've actually got a situation today where every single Maasai tribe's children now can access high school education entirely as a result of nature tourism, from the revenues that are generated. There was a study actually that was published earlier this year, in January, I think it was, that said that if South Africa, for example, were to switch wholesale from trophy hunting to nature tourism, that would create 11 times as many jobs in the poor rural areas where trophy hunting currently often takes place. So there really is no comparison. We need to be finding sustainable alternatives and finding a way that we can actually generate the revenues conservation, which also create jobs and prosperity in local areas, in local communities in Africa.
Wonderful, thank you. Somewhat related to that, in places where photo tourism is not possible and can bring in the kind of revenue to support conservation, what are alternatives to conserving wildlife?
Do you want me to answer that? Certainly there needs to be a lot more work done, because what we have at the moment is people who defend trophy hunting saying, well, there's just no alternative. And it's sometimes quite sad to see one or two scientists doing exactly the same, when surely this is their business, is to research and to think and to explore and to look into new ideas. And what we do know is that where it's been tried, nature tourism has actually worked quite well. And there's going to be examples that are going to be better than others. There's going to be places where it works better than other places. What we need to do is to look at the best practice models and see if we can scale them up, but also look at other alternatives where perhaps it might not work quite as well, but where we might be looking, for example, at more virtual nature tourism. And I think actually that's something that we need to be doing anyway in this post-COVID-19 era. And I certainly, wouldn't want to see a sudden huge influx of people into sensitive habitat areas and necessitating the creation of new infrastructure that fragments habitats. And of course, there's the carbon emissions that come into all of that as well. But at the moment, what we do know from the places where it has been tried is that nature tourism generally works much better, both in terms of conservation and in terms of job creation. Let me just give you one example, actually, because people sort of still say, trophy hunting, it's the only thing that is going to conserve wildlife and pay for conservation. Let's take the example of Cecil, because that's where we've started off this conversation. So Walter Palmer, the American dentist who shot Cecil, he will have paid about $30,000 for the trophy fee as part of the whole package. $30,000 was the trophy fee that he'll have paid to the Zimbabwean government, supposedly going into the environmental authorities' budgets and its coffers, and then reinvested in conservation. I mean, there's no actual evidence that there was any of that money that went back into conservation. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that those $30,000 were all ploughed back into lion conservation. Well, Andrew Loveridge, who was the Oxford University scientist who radio-collared and monitored Cecil until he was shot by Palmer, he has calculated that the actual cost of conserving a lion like Cecil and his habitats and so on is going to be something like $1 million over his lifetime. So $30,000 doesn't come close. Loveridge also said that the value of a lion like Cecil to nature tourism was somewhere in the order of $100,000 a year. Now, given that a lion in the wild, its average lifespan is going to be about 15 years, you can do the math. So it's very clear that it actually pays to keep the animal alive rather than shoot it. So nature tourism is always going to be, as a rule, the better solution. That's why we need to be doing much more work into looking at all the different options, all the alternatives, what can work best in different places.
That's great. Liz, you have more to add?
I do, just briefly. I think something we also need to be very careful of is kind of treating the African continent, if you like, as a homogenous mass, or an African country as a homogenous mass, just saying, you know, what works in this place, why can't we make it work in that place? When we're looking at alternatives, we need to be really engaging with local communities. And for example, the report that Born Free Foundation released last year on trophy hunting heard loud and clear that local communities were not being heard when it came to trophy hunting. So when we look at the panel today, let's be honest, we are a group of white faces in the West, in the global West, talking about trophy hunting, which is valuable because we are, as we've said, it's supply and demand. We're creating the demand. We need to sort out our own houses. But I think when we're talking about long-term alternatives, if you like, those conversations need to be had with local communities at a local level, with local leadership, and that will differ. That may differ from community to community within a very small geographical range on what works and what is needed in those areas. So I think we need to be really careful about, you know, this African country requires this solution, because that isn't how human society works, and that isn't how environmental impacts work in any one given country or geographical zone.
Thank you, Liz. And that is going to bring us to the end of our time. We have had so many more questions that we did not get to. If you would like to write to us directly, you can do that at info@bornfreeusa.org. We'll be happy to respond or direct your question to any of our other panelists. We will also be sending an email tomorrow with these links, as well as additional links to how you can take action, how you can donate. It will also include the recording of this webinar, so you can watch it again or share with any of your friends. We'll review the chat and try to see if we can address any other questions as well, just bilaterally. Again, I would just like to thank you very much for attending. If you'd like to partner with us in this fight, please do consider making a donation to Born Free USA, the Campaign to Ban Trophy Hunting, a Born Free Foundation. And thanks again to all of our wonderful panelists, and to Karen, who you didn't see but is behind the scenes running all of this, and to all of you for being a part of making this world a better place for animals. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.